Model Making Guru is sponsored by emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. Hey everybody, it's Fox from modelmaking.guru here. Hello, and welcome to possibly what might be the final episode in my build of Bandai's 1/72nd scale perfect grade Millennium Falcon. Yes, it's the big fat Millennium Falcon that I'm building for my very, very dear friends and channel sponsors over at emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs. All of them, every single need you have, all of them model making related, they will all be taken care of at eModels. Go check them out, emodels.co.uk. Anyway, yes, let's crack on. This hopefully will be the final episode, because all that's left to do now is the weathering, the muckification, the dirtulons that we need to add to this model. Now, this does look pretty spanky and cool, actually, to be honest. It's got a little bit of hint of weathering from the chipping in the decals to the pre-shading we've done. You could feasibly leave it like this, but we can do a lot more. Now, if you keep in mind, of course, I've said several times, I'm using the original filming 5-foot miniature. 5-foot miniature is like a contradiction in terms, like an oxymoron. I'm using the 5-foot miniature as an inspiration, but I'm not slavishly following what the 5-foot filming model looks like. For one very good reason, it looks like garbage. If you look at the big studio model, the paint finish and the weathering is terrible because it's designed to be on screen and not viewed close up as an actual model. So the weathering on the studio model is real kind of painted with half a potato basic. It's not anything spectacular. So we're going to ignore that. We're going to use it as a reference guide. I'm going to try and follow things like streaks and stuff to sort of match it a bit. But I'm really going to do a realistic version of the Falcon. So what it would be like if we apply traditional weathering techniques to it to suggest a craft that flies in space and in atmosphere and can often sit in all weathers in a landing pad. It could have rain falling down. It could have oil leaking. It's an old ship. So we're going to do some realistic, styly kind of weathering. So anybody out there who's a purist to make it look exactly like the studio model, yeah, you're going to be annoyed because we're not going to do that massively. We're also not going to do, hopefully, not do a lot of the things that a lot of people kind of do in error, which is go too heavy with some of the dark staining. When we were young and we used to make the old AMT kits of this ship, all we ever had was VHS copy of Star Wars and the thing on the front of the box, the photograph on the front of the model box, and it was always really dark and contrasty. So consequently, a lot of us put big dark patches around these little recess pits here and dark areas on the exhaust at the back. But if you look at the studio model, things like the exhaust, it's not that blatant. So we're gonna kind of do a real life what if version, and we're gonna need a few bits and bobs. Now I'm going to show you all what we're going to need right now. However, I guarantee as I go along, I'll probably come up with some other ideas and add some of the bits and bobs along the way. So let me go and get all the bits that I know I'm going to be using at this point, and anything else that comes up in the meantime, I'll let you know as we go along. So I'll move this out of the way, this beautiful, beautiful ship. Yes, and we'll crack on. So I'll go and get all the bits. Back in a minute. So what are we going to need? First thing I'm going to do is put a surface down. I've got here my scruffy old cutting mat that I use for painting to keep my proper decent cutting mat nice and clean. Why? Because we're going to be using a lot of oil paints, and trust me, oil paints will get everywhere. You'll get them on your elbow. You will actually find oil paint on your elbow at some point during this process. Trust me, it will happen. Don't ask me how, it just does. So you want to put something down to keep things nice and neat, especially if you've got a lot of money invested in your lovely, lovely cutting mat, or you're working on someone else's kitchen table. You want to take precautions. Put some paper down, put an old cutting mat, anything you can do to protect that surface. Now, as for the oil paints on this project, I'm going to be using lovely colours. I'm going to be using 502 Abteilung oil paints. Yes, these are my favourite. Now, you can of course use any old oil paints, and I'll explain why we need oil paints as we go along, but I'm going to be doing a lot of weathering with oil paints. Now, you can use any old artist's oil paints that you can get from any old art shop. However, I do strongly recommend you get these instead for model making. Abteilung, or rather 502 Abteilung oil paints, are designed specifically with model making in mind. There's two major differences between these and traditional artist oil paints. First and foremost, traditional artist oils are very, very oily. Now that might sound kind of obvious because they're oil paints. What I mean is these are quite dry. They're not splurgy. When you get them on the palette, it's not going to be like a gloopy mess. They're fairly dry. Traditional artist oils have a lot of linseed oil or other carriers in there that it's everywhere. When you squeeze them out, you get half of the stuff that comes out is just the juice and half of it's the pigment. So what you tend to have to do with traditional artist oil is get them on a piece of cardboard or thick card or paper and let the oils leach away before you start using them. Because artist oils are designed to go on big 8-foot by 10-foot canvases. They're not designed for small models. These are less oily, so you can use them and they'll have a faster drying time and they're more controllable. These also have a much finer pigment than traditional artist oils, especially compared to cheap, crappy artist oils. These have a much finer, denser pigment. So they're more opaque and they're more they're easier to work with, and they're much more suited for fine blends and transitions and delicate work. These are kind of designed with figure painters in mind, whereas traditional artist oils are designed for people that are painting massive canvases where you're going to have brush strokes and obvious stuff. These are designed for, especially for things like armour and figure painters, where you want invisible blends and fades and transitions, and this is what these are perfect for. So I do recommend, although you can use any old artist oil, if you want the easiest time in the best paints, get yourself some of these 502 Abteilung oil paints. They are in stock now and they are fantastic. Now, you'll see here I've got a selection of colours. If you remember, I'm trying to go for a whole colour that's still warm. I don't want it to go too cold towards the blue end of the spectrum. So I've got one light blue. This is Copper Oxide Blue Patina. But that's it. That's the only real cold colour I've got. I have a Dead Flesh, which it's a little bit warm. It's a little bit, that's kind of similar to our base colour. And then I've got lots of browns and one green, because we're going to be doing some rust effects anyway. And I want to have the suggestion of dirt and grime and dust and a bit of rust. And green. Green's just good because I want to suggest it flies in space, but it's also sat in spaceports on the ground on planets sometimes, and it's getting rained on, and you might have algae grow, building up over the years where rain collects and pools and water and stuff. So there's no reason why you wouldn't have sort of green staining on the Falcon, because it's in atmosphere as well as space. Obviously the algae would die when it goes into space, but it would still stain the ship. Now, these are all important colours. However, these are all irrelevant when compared to this. The most important colour you'll ever have, bam, 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 Starship Filth. Ooh. Yes, my favourite colour in the whole world, my favourite oil colour, my favourite paint for weathering, 502 Abteilung, Starship Filth, F510. This is a beautiful, beautiful colour. It is the perfect grime and weathering colour. It is a dark, it's got a hint of blue to it. It is kind of towards the blue end of the spectrum. It's not an oily sort of dark grey, but it's just a dark, slightly bluey, oily grey. And it's perfect for gunk, for grime, for washing, for painting on, for dry brushing. It's everything you'll ever need. You could do a whole load of weathering just with that. And I have weathered models just with Starship Filth. This is perfect. I do recommend, if you're going to get 502 colours, you must get Starship Filth, at least this, because this is a good universal oily, grimy, greasy colour. It's brilliant. Get yourself some of that. So these are all the oil paints I'm going to use. Depending on how the first few steps turn out, I may add some extra colours. There are some colours I don't have in this range that I have got in traditional artist oils, like bright yellows and bright reds and things like that. I'll see how it goes. Now, of course, if we're using oil paints, we're going to need thinners for the oil paints. Now, you can use, you can go into Dad's garage and nick his bottle of terps or methylated spirits or white spirits, or, in America, you might see them listed as mineral spirits. You can do that, but they're going to stink something rotten. And this is a Bandai kit. We need to be very careful what thinners we use on the plastics, and I'll explain that later as well. So for this, I'm going to be using the Abteilung 502 odourless thinners. Now, other brands of odourless thinners are available. You don't have to just use this if you're using the 502 paints. I'll also have something to put the paints on, and you'll see me use this. It's just a piece of plastic. I recommend, if you're using the Ammo by Meg, just a piece of plastic's fine. If you're using traditional artist oil, use a piece of cardboard or thick cardstock paper instead to absorb and leach away all the oils. And last of all, brushes. I have here, first of all, a huge collection of old brushes that I don't really care about. I do keep them clean and washed, but they're all fluffy and horrible, and I don't really care about them too much. So you don't want to use your best brushes for this. I'll say that again in English, you don't want to use your best brushes for this. So I've got a collection of old brushes of all different sizes, and I have a collection of very nice big flat brushes. Now these are proper artist brushes, and I don't recommend you get these. This brush on its own is like 25 quid. This one. So these are, I used to do proper painting on canvas type art, so these are big expensive Daler-Rowney art brushes. Galleria brushes are quite expensive. There's a lot, I've got loads of them. I'm going to find some quite good use for these, but it doesn't really matter if they're not proper artist brushes. Just big, flat, soft brushes you're going to find perfect for some of the effects we're going to do. If the best you've got is some sort of Games Workshop dry brush brushes, that'll be fine. Anything flat, chisel edged ideally, or like that, you know, anything soft and flat, because we're going to do a lot of dragging and smoothing and blending and things like that. And I think that's just about everything. We'll probably need some cotton buds, obviously. I don't know why I said obviously, you don't know that yet because I'm not showing you. I'm an idiot. I've not had my coffee yet, I'm talking rubbish. That is, for the moment, what I think we're going to need. It's not too much, not too much at all. It's a small selection of stuff. I'm sure I'll come up with other things as we go along. Now the first step we're going to do, the first tranche of weathering, is we're going to do what's called a dot filter. Now if you're not familiar with this, don't worry, I'll explain it all. If you are familiar with a dot filter, if you've built your tanks and planes and realistic military vehicles, you might be more than familiar with this. But don't forget, I am tailoring these videos towards people that have never done any of this before, so I'm assuming the viewer has no prior knowledge. We're going to do a dot filter, and what this is, it's a way of just giving the surface of the model some variation, some dynamic life quality to it. I mean, this looks pretty good as it is. It's nice and, you know, interesting to look at, but it's kind of just one colour, and there's no story to it. There's no life happened here. There's been no interactions between the thing and the environment around it. We want to suggest use and wear. Now, I don't want to make it look like it's been buried in a mud pit for 100 years. I'm not looking to do that, but I am looking to give it some variation. And what a dot filter will do is the first step in just making this uniform or reasonably uniform surface look a bit more lived in, a bit more organic. Now, weathering is one of those things that is entirely your choice and entirely personal. Like I said at the start, I'm not looking to reproduce the filming miniature now at this point. I'm going for realistic or pseudo sort of realistic weathering, more like a traditional model making technique. If you want to leave it like this, you can do. If you want to go super weathered, like it's been in the middle of a horrible dark cloudy nebula for months and it's just built up crud all over it, or it's been flying through volcanic ash, I don't know, whatever you want to make it look like, it's been buried at the bottom of a swamp, you can do that. Weathering is completely to your taste. You can go as little or as much, but I'm going to go for a reasonable amount of weathering, but not too much. So what does a dot filter do? A dot filter, whenever you think of a filter as, imagine a stage light in a theatre. You've got a big bulb and it's white light. It just projects white light. If I take a piece of red gel, which is red translucent material, like red transparent film, and put it over the bulb, that bulb now projects red light. If I take that off and put a piece of blue film over it, a blue gel, that now is blue light coming out of the lamp. And if I put the red and the blue together, it gives me a green light. These are what's called filters. They add a colour to the image. They change the colour tone of the image. I don't want to change the colour of this ship completely, but I want to add a filter to take it away from this cool, slightly warm cream colour to more of an earthy tone. So we're going to filter it, and there's different ways of doing filters. I have a selection of small brushes. Remember, these are all scruffy brushes. These are not my Sunday best brushes. These are ones where I've given up hope looking after them perfectly, and they've gone into the big glass of brushes that I can use for scruffy jobs. So I've got one of those, loads of those. I've got my little piece of plastic as a palette with little dots of various colours. It doesn't matter which colours you use. You can use whatever colours you want. I'm just going for a wide selection. And I've got basically one brush for each of those coloured dots because I don't want to mix them up. And all we're going to do is two things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take each brush one by one, and we're going to take one of each colour. And this is the real scientific bit, because what we're going to do here, we're going to use mathematics, and we're going to use horrible thinking and deep dot, and we're going to go, there you go, that's it. We're going to go like this. We're going to put dots of this on the surface. Now you can go as heavy or as light as you want. I've got quite a flat brush here, which is a bit rubbish. You can do as many or as few as you want. I'm going for a light effect, so I don't want to do lots of these. You can do as few or as many as you want. So we'll get some of those. I'm going to go one brush per colour, just to keep them all separate. The next colour I have is a sort of darker blue colour, so we'll put some of these dots on. Now I don't want to do too much blue, because if I do too many blues, it's going to shift this towards the cold end of the spectrum. So I've got to be careful. That's why I'm going to go for lots of browns and cream colours as well. So we'll go for a cream colour here. Now this colour is not far off the actual hull itself. And like I said, you can do as little or as much of this one. Big dots, you can do big massive splodges, you can do little tiny splodges, you can do all kinds of stuff. We'll go for a brown colour. And the beauty of these oil paints, like I said before, the reason we're using oil paints in enamels is that oil paints, if I left these dots of paints as they were, it would take them days, if not weeks, to dry fully. I can work them for ages. And what we're going to do is basically remove a lot of this. We're going to smear it out. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to get these colours on here. I've got some green here, which is a very dark green, so I'm not going to do too much of that. You can do as much or as little as you like. I'm going to go quite handy here with it, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. Because they are workable, the next step, when it comes to it, we can take off any excess quite easily. And see how I'm working in this? I'm not doing the whole ship all in one go. I'm going in sections, and I do recommend you go in sections. Luckily, this ship is kind of divided into sections. Go for my favourite in the whole world, the Starship Filth, which is a sort of dark grey. It's not a bluey grey. It's a warm tone, but it's not like an oily brown warm tone. It's hard to explain, but there we go. Right, so that's all the little dots of paint on there. You're now thinking, what the hell? What are you doing? Now is where the fun starts. So this paint is on here. Now you can leave this for, half an hour, 10 minutes. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to do this bit straight away, but I do recommend that you do. What I've got, I have a small container with some of the oil paint thinner. I have one of my big flat soft brushes, and what I'm going to do, first thing I'm going to do is dip the brush in the thinner, as you can see there. Now this is the important bit. On any other model kit you don't need to do this next step, but this is a Bandai kit. Bandai kits have a very special kind of polystyrene that does not react well to thinners. If I was to slop oil paint thinners or any kind of thinners all over this model, it may damage, break, crack, or eat away at the plastic, even though it's been primed and painted. So these next few steps, whenever we're using thinners, we have to be very, very careful. We cannot allow thinners to build up or pool up or seep into any cracks and get inside where there's maybe no primer to work on the plastic. Because if it's under stress, if a section is under stress and it's pushed in place and the thinners get in there and weaken it, it could crack. So you can damage Bandai kits. So there's a lot of things you can't do with Bandai kits. So what I'm going to do, I've soaked the brush in the thinner, and now I'm going to get most of that off on a tissue. I want this to be damp, not wet. I'm not going to cover the model in thinner. I don't want the thinner to run. And all we're going to do is this. We're going to drag this around. We're going to smear the paint. Now I know it looks terrible straight away. Remember, this model has been matte varnished. Now this looks like, I know you're thinking, what the hell is this? This looks terrible, Fox. What are you doing? And now it looks pretty bad, doesn't it? Don't worry. This is early days. What we're doing is we're just smearing this everywhere. Now it's going to take a bit of effort. It's not going to all happen at once. I'm going to have to get some more thinners on the brush and then get most of that thinner off on the tissue again. Like I said, if this was any other model where you could use a heavier dose of thinners, you could actually use the brush dripping in thinners. It wouldn't take as much effort, but because this is a Bandai and we can't do that, we have to be, I'll do it this way so you can see, we have to be a lot more careful. So it's going to take a few more goes of the brush to work these things away, these colours. I'm going to go backwards and forwards. Now you don't have to do this, but I'm kind of following the general shape of the vehicle. I'm kind of pulling it down this way to go with the natural flow of liquids. If they were on the surface, they'd follow gravity. You don't have to, you can go up and down, you can go in little circles if you want. Let's do a bit more, get more thinner. Now you are going to get through quite a lot of thinner at this point. So what we can do here, if we want to take some off, we can do little circles, for example. We can do circular shapes. You can't go wrong with this because we're doing oil paints. You can't really go wrong. They can be worked for hours. You can easily remove them by wiping them away with more thinner. Get some off on the brush. I'll just try working this around. Apologies if all you can see is my hand. The camera's in kind of the wrong place. But the thing to keep in mind as well, you may be looking at this now and thinking that looks terrible. because it's not the same as the colour you saw a moment ago. But you have to remember, once the whole ship has got this kind of effect on it, it'll just look like the Falcon. It won't look like that compared to that. Now it's like, oh, it looks green. But that's because you're seeing this compared to the clean bits. And you're used to seeing the clean bits. Don't get discouraged the first time you do this. It will suddenly look like massively different to what you've been seeing for the last few days or weeks, however long you've been working on it. But as you do the rest of the model, it will start to become uniform and make sense. So take your time. I'm just going backwards and forwards to make sure I haven't got any obvious brush marks, because you will get little, not brush marks as such, not a texture, but you will see bits where the pigment's built up and has got, you know, you can see a kind of a swoosh mark. A bit more thinner on this bit. You can scrub it like this to try and lift up some of the pigment, wipe some of the pigment off on the brush. If you're not getting rid of it quickly, just get some up on the brush and then wipe it off on the tissue just to move it around. Now you see why we did the matte varnish though. That matte varnish is protecting those decals, because those decals would have easily been rubbed away by now. So there we go. So we'll just keep working on this. And it might take a little while. That's the beauty of oil paints. You can keep working it. You can keep working it. Not a problem. But remember, this is supposed to be a 90-year-old ship. Some discoloration is to be expected. Now, if you've got a particular panel that you want to keep clean, for example, let's say that one there. If you want a slight variation, I can take a cotton bud and again get some of the thinner, but again, just damp it down. And I can just work on that panel if I want to. Now, because you covered it in an acrylic varnish, the oil paint thinners are not going to do any harm to the acrylic varnish. You're not going to pull the varnish up or any of the paint underneath, because they don't interact. If I covered this in normal acrylic thinners, which would destroy the model anyway, it would probably bring up the varnish and paint, reactivate them all. But because this is oil paint thinners, it has almost no effect at all on the model. So let me just get some more thinners on there. Just gently rub. You can see there that's bringing off more of the paint, and that's now a slightly different hue. So I'm going to carry on working this. I'm just going to put them thinner in my reservoir because it gets used up quite quickly. I'm going to keep working this with the moistened brush until it's at a point where I'm happy. You can add as little or as much as you like. You can take off as much paint as you want. You can put it back on. If you think you've gone too far and it's gone too pale again, just do some more dots. Once you've done this all over the ship, you need to leave it to dry for a minimum 24 hours, and then you can move on to the next step. So I'll go and get on with that, and I'll see you in a minute. And after 24 hours of drying time, we're left with this. Look, now it looks nice and grubby and slightly filthy to me. Not horribly filthy, but just like grubby. Now, I appreciate you're watching this. It's been filmed on a digital camera. It's being watched through probably a computer monitor or TV. You're probably not seeing this exactly as it looks. To you, it might look, if it's overexposed, it might just look white. So I do appreciate that, but it's looking like a nice warm off-white colour. And just to compare and contrast, there's a fruit fly on my desk. It's whizzing around. Go away. To compare and contrast with an actual white colour, here's my white balance test card. You can see the difference now between actual white and the colour we've got. Now, another thing that's interesting that I realised when I was taking some photographs, when I'd painted all this, when I'd done the filter on all of the hull, but I hadn't yet filtered the back engine cover, I put the engine cover on. Have a look at this. So I hope you can appreciate there the massive difference between the back panel, which was untouched, and the rest of the ship, which had been filtered. Now, up until that point, keep in mind, I, and probably you as well, thought that we had a wonderful warm off-white colour to this ship. Even just the basic paint mix that we did, we thought, oh, it's a nice warm off-white, that is just right. Except it wasn't, because it just goes to show with this filter, now we've got a nice warm off-white colour, and just the paint on its own was cold and blue tinged. It wasn't as warm as you think. So you never should trust white paints. White paints, you'll always think you've got the right shade until you've got towards the end of the project and you realised you haven't. I do that with gunpla all the time. I paint the white armour parts. I think they're perfect, and when I come to the very end and I'm doing photographs and I've got white paper as a backdrop, I realise oh, it's too pale, it's too dark, it's too grey, it's too blue. I always get it wrong. So always never trust your eyes with white colours, and always have something available to hand. Like this is my colour balance card, and you can see now. Again, I appreciate you're not seeing this colour as it actually is. You're probably seeing this as just a nice white colour on telly, but that's actual white, and that's the whole colour. There may not be a big difference for you, but there is for me, trust me. So it just goes to show the power of filters and glazes and things like that. You don't have to go into thick layers of paint to change a colour completely, especially for whites. Now, what's the next step? The next step is we have to move forward with the weathering. Remember, of course, we're not following the studio model at this point. We are veering away. We've already long veered away from what the studio model looks like. We are going to do streaking, and we're going to suggest all the grime and dirt and rust and gunk that's built up. This thing is landed on planets. It might be rained on. It could be going through wet atmospheres. Some of that is going to go into solution and run down the ship. So we're going to put on some streaks that radiate from the centre outwards. Now, underneath, of course, this is all bound by gravity. Water will run from the centre here out down the ship. Underneath, of course, it's the other way. The water will run from the outside in. So when you're streaking underneath, you have to remember to go the other way. You have to go from that to that rather than from that to that, if that makes sense. I'm going to streak from this end to this end. Underneath, I'm going to go from the outside to the inside. Now, this is a very easy, very straightforward step, and it's not complicated at all. What do we need? Well, I just need 3 colours. Abteilung Dark Rust 070, Earth, which is 093, and of course, Starship Filth F510. And these colours are going to suggest grime and gunk. The 2 rusty colours are there for all the rust and corrosion that's leached down the ship, and the Starship Filth just suggests all the gunk that's been washed out by water or fluids, you know, running down the side of the ship and drawing that gunk out and streaking it down the side. And this is going to be very easy. I've got a small number of brushes, 2 small brushes to put the paint on the model, a nice fat lumpy brush to put thinner on the model, 2 big flat brushes that I will keep dry. These are for making the streaks. And last of all, my paints on a plastic palette. And of course, a little pot of thinners. I forgot I got these little metal pots. I've got a pot of thinners. What we're going to do is we're going to start off by putting some thinner on the model. Now, remember I said the plastic on these Bandai kits is very susceptible to damage by thinners. So don't start slopping it everywhere. You want to get the brush moist but not dripping wet. I've just got some thinner on that. I've got it moistened, and what I'm going to do is apply it to maybe a bit more than that. I don't want it running on like I'm dripping it in water, because I don't want it to go into any little nooks and crannies and potentially damage the plastic, but I need to get it wet and moist. It's very important. Remember, we did this. I haven't put any varnish on this since the last time we did this. I'm going to go ahead and put the paint on. I'm going to put on some Starship Filth first of all. And now this is difficult for me to do with the camera there, but we're just going to put down some stripes. Now it is very important that you leave the paint from the last step we did, that you leave the paint for at least 24 hours. Because you'll notice I haven't varnished this. I haven't put any varnish over the last lot we did. This is exactly as it was, but it's had 24 hours to cure and dry a bit, which just helps that paint stay where it is. Now you see here I'm not being careful. I'm just putting the paint on. I'm trying to stick to the directionality of the hull. I'm trying to stay sort of not parallel, but you know what I mean, coming out from the centre. I don't want things going that way and that way, because that wouldn't make any sense at all. But I'm not being careful. I'm just putting these streaks on where I see fit. And all we're going to do now is we're going to take our big brush. Dead simple. We're just going to simply start fanning this. Now I'm going to have to stand up, so I might sound a bit funny, but I'm standing up because it's easier to do and it's a very long paintbrush. So apologies if this goes off camera. Almost no pressure and almost not touching the model. I'm just going to lightly tease this over the streaks, following the direction. I'm not going like this. I'm following the direction of the verticals, as it were. So I'm doing a concentric pattern so I can keep these lined up properly. And I'm just going like this. Carefully, because I don't want to damage any surface details. And I'll go up again the other way. Just brush back on it. It's a good way of blending it away. It'll drag the paint out and it'll help build up that streakiness. Now it will, of course, blend some of them together a bit, but that's fine. You can put the brush edge on if you want to try and tidy things up to scrape some of that paint away. If you get a streak that's not quite parallel, you can just flick it a bit and try and guide it. That one there, you can see down here, this one down here isn't quite parallel, if you can see it, isn't quite, it's kind of off at a funny angle, so we can just tease that back into the right direction a little bit. You can make them thinner, and the beauty of oil paints is if you mess something up, you can just dampen the brush, come in with a bit of thinner, and just remove it all together. And these will stay workable for quite a while. So you're not under any time pressure here, just take your time, go slowly, and make some streaks. I've got a slightly smaller brush here if we want to get a bit more in depth. So I want to make a sort of clean section here, I can do that. And all the time I'm making sure I'm staying parallel to these, to the panel lines going this way, the concentric panel. I don't really know what the phrase is, but you know what I mean. If you think you've made the whole thing a bit too dirty, I probably put too many streaks on there, really. I can get some thinner on a brush. If I get myself another brush, get myself this one, I'll get some thinner on it, take most of the thinner off, and I can just clean some of that oil paint away. You see what I'm doing there? I'm just cleaning away the oil paint, still going in the same up-down direction, so that whatever paint I do move around is still streaks like a streak. For here, for example, what I might want to do is take this away altogether. So let's just get the brush under here, get rid of that, and then we can restreak it just to make sure it matches. I'll get this dry brush back again. We'll flick it that way. There we go. And it's just taken that streak. It's instead of starting halfway up here now, it starts kind of halfway along. So I can just start fading that, feathering them out. And it's just a case of going along and adding as many or as few streaks as you want, tidying up where you need to, and making mess where you want to. It's all about making mess, and that's fun. So I'll go and get the whole rest of the ship done. Just remember, of course, when you're doing the underneath, you need to go from the outside in rather than the inside out, because it's upside down. Remember, it's always about gravity. Just feather that one a bit. So I'll go and crack on, and when we come back, we'll do the next step. See you in a bit. And after several hours of streaky times, that bit's done. There you go. It looks nice and grubby and filthy and dirty. And because of it, obviously we're using brushing the paint around and wiping it and smearing it, it also adds even more of a tint and a shade to the surface. As well as making the streaks, it also goes into all the little recesses and creates a bit of a panel line wash. And it also tints the surface and discolours it even more. So it looks more filthy and more grubby, but you're left with the streaks behind. Now, if you're looking at this and thinking it looks a lot more weathered and beaten than the studio model, you're not wrong. Remember, I'm inspired by that, but I'm not slavishly copying it. But the thing to remember is, if you look at the studio model, although it looks like I've gone crazy with the streaks here, and we've got the same underneath, the studio model actually has lots and lots of weathering all over it that you wouldn't actually realise was there because you don't see it on screen. It just looks grey or white. It's actually got a lot of this weathering. The thing to keep in mind is the studio model is 5 foot across. It's massive. So it might have the same weathering and the same maybe number of streaks. It's just more spread out to your eyes, so it looks less weathered. There's more clean area than there is weathered area. But if you look at the model itself, it is filthy, it's dirty, it's grubby, there's grime everywhere, there's streaks, there's rust, there's loads of rust patches, all kind of blaster marks and all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't actually normally see. So this kind of looks about right, not following it slavishly. It's just compressed down into a smaller model, so it looks more intense and compressed. Anyway, that's that bit done. What's next? Well, like I said, there's lots of weathering that you don't even know is on the Falcon, that you've never seen, and it's not just streaking. We've got to do a few things now. We're still going to be using oil paints, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to recreate blaster marks. There's lots of blaster marks and scorch marks all over the Falcon that suggest blaster bolts have pinged off the armour, but they've not broken the surface, they've not impacted it like here near the Rec 10 dish. You've got these literal, craters where blaster bolts have gone in or something's impacted it. But there's lots of areas where it's just blast marks, scorch marks. There's also lots of rust patches, loads and loads of rusty patches on the sidewalls, lots of rust patches everywhere. The whole ship is really, really rusty. And also there's lots of little paint chips and dings and things like that that are just painted on the surface. So I need to do those three things. What we're going to use, I have two paints here on my palette, and they are, of course, the Starship Filth, Abteilung F510, we've used that already, and Abteilung Light Rust Brown, which is ABT060. I'm going to use those two paints to do that. And I've just got a couple of small brushes. I'm going to go for fine brushes, and it's going to be a little mixture of painting paint directly on and sort of dry brushing a little bit. Now, I've also got a handy reference guide here. I have, in my travels, acquired a collection of reference pictures. Let me take the Rec 10 dish off so I don't break it. Reference pictures of, if you can see this, I don't know if it'll come out on camera, reference pictures of the studio model, the 5-foot studio model, not the 32-inch studio model because that looks different, but the 5-foot studio model. And you can see here there's lots and lots of reference images. Hopefully that's bright enough. And I'm going to be working through these and trying to not reproduce it exactly, because I'm not quite that, intensely desperate to get it exactly right, but just use it as a guide, a rough guide, just to get an idea of where all the weathering and rust patches especially need to be. There's lots of rust patches on the sidewalls. There's lots of things like all these little blaster marks here you can see, and I hope this is coming out. All these little blaster marks here, I need to reproduce those. It can be really easy, so let's get that done. Okay, so to start with, I'll just show you how I'm going to do some of the blaster scorch marks. Now, if you look at the reference, you can see there's blaster scorch marks here, and some of them are just solid blobs of colour, dark grey, and some of them have got like a smoky effect around them. So I'm going to try and reproduce that. So the first thing we need to do is the smoky effect, which I need to put, where's the reference picture, kind of here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to get myself some Starship Filth, my lovely, lovely Starship Filth. And I'm going to put some little tiny blobs here, a little bit here, and a little bit, where's that go? I'm just looking at the reference picture while I'm painting. A little bit here, and then there's more over here like that. So we'll put a bit there. Now what I'm going to do, get myself a slightly bigger brush now, just for dry brushing effects. This is an old base brush, but it works great for dry brushing. And what I'm going to do now is literally just kind of feather those out. I may have put too much on, but that's fine. So I need to feather these out a little bit. So that one's a bit too intense. So what I might need to do is clean up a little bit. So if I feather those. Okay, that is actually a bit too much. Now this is the trick with this. It is kind of a hit and miss process. You're never going to get it right straight away. But this is the beauty of oil paints. If I get myself a third brush, get some thinner on that brush, and what I can do is take that away. Got some thinner on the brush, I'm just stabbing it a little bit. That will reduce the amount of paint there, a little bit more thinner. But I'm not brushing it, I'm just stabbing it. And I can blow on it. Go back in with my dry brush, which has now got paint on it. Let me just wipe some of that off. And I can go back to feathering this a little bit. Still doing stabity sometimes doing a bit more rubbing. But I can keep working this until it fades away. And there we go, that's better. Just trying to stop it being so uniform and obvious. Right, so then we've got some patchings. What we need to do now is come back with our little fine brush and a little bit of the Starship Filth. Now I've added a tiniest bit of thinner to this. I'm just dampening the brush with thinner so I can make it a bit more flowy. And what I'm going to do now is add the little centres of the scorching blasts. Just little touches there. Now this won't be accurate, it's not going to be screen accurate, but it's just to give the impression. Now I've got this brush, I don't know if you can see, but this brush is not the pointiest brush in the world. It's an old brush. I'm always using old brushes for these techniques, and there's a few hairs sticking out. That's perfect. That'll do nicely. Because what I'm doing is I want to get it a little bit random. I've got a tiniest touch of thinner on the brush this time, just because I want this to flow. We have a little splob there, a couple of little ones here. And then it goes up here like that. It's not going to be screen accurate, like I say. It's not going to be absolutely, spot on. There'll be people out there, purists, will be like pulling their hair out saying, that's not what it looks like. Just shut up, is what I say to them. Now there were a few areas where I used both of those techniques to create sort of staining and pitting and scorch damage. I'll shut up and I'll just show you those areas because there's no point me explaining it all again. Here's some nice pictures. Now, one of the very last steps now. Almost there, almost there. Yes, now it's time to do one of the most iconic parts of the Falcon, and that is the engine area, the bit with the billion greebles that you kind of all know where the exhausts are. Now, interesting fact, on the real studio miniature, the 5-foot miniature, these vents had actual fans underneath them. I know on the model here, you probably can't see, but we've got fans underneath. They actually had real fans on the filming model because this was where all the heat from inside was vented out, because in those days they didn't have little tiny LEDs. They had to use like halogen bulbs and things like that that generated lots of heat, and if you didn't want your model to melt or burst into flame, you had to vent the heat. So they're actual fans. This is why these are here, purely as a practical measure to cool the model down. Interesting point. Anyway, we're going to do this bit now. It's the staining on the back plate. Now this is where a lot of people go wrong, really. Now, keep in mind, like I've said before, you're seeing this a bit differently to the way it actually looks in real life. Remember, it's lighting and video and stuff. You might see this as a bit more stark and contrasty than it actually is. When you go to e-models and see this in person, it'll look a bit different. But a lot of people, what they do is they look at the 32-inch model, or they look at box art of the 32-inch model, and it has these black stripes down the back, and they just paint black stripes. No. It's not how it looks. If you look at the 5-foot model, the actual staining on the back here is very, very subtle. It's really, really subtle. It's almost imperceptible. It's not big, solid black stripes. And you get people that paint either solid black stripes from each one, or they do 2 on either side. It's not right. It's just not right. So we're going to use 2 colours. We're going to carry on using the Starship Filth. Starship Filth. Yes. And we're going to use some more of the Earth ABT093 for the rusty colour, just to match these other rusty stains. Now, one thing that most people don't realise is this bit here, this vent, has a ton of rust on there. Now, if these are oil paints, remember these stay sticky and moist for a long time. If I do the Starship Filth all over these first, and then try and put the rust on, it's going to blend away into a mush. So I'm going to do the rust on this one first, and then work the Starship Filth around it. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've got my bits of paint on an palette. That's all going to be dry brushing. Again, we're still doing dry brushing. Going to get myself some of the earth colour. Don't need a lot, just a little bit on the brush. Get most of the paint off. I should have shown this before really, but it wasn't really practical when I hold the whole ass ship here. Get the rust off there, the colour off, and all we're going to do is for this bit, I've got the reference picture in front of me. It's mostly kind of here. So we're just going to very lightly, in fact it's quite an intense rust colour, so I'm going to go a bit crazy with this one. It's kind of there like that. I hope this is on camera. It's kind of there like that. And then there's a splodge here. And there's a bit more of a splodge here. There's also, on the real thing, there's lots of bit where the little individual louvers have been prized apart and bent and damaged. But I'm not going to try and replicate that because I don't want to risk damaging the actual photo etch part and knackering the whole thing. And the rust doesn't seem to carry on at all onto the outer rim of it, just there. And then we've also got a little tiny bit here, little tiny bit there, Has that actually popped out a little bit? Oh no. I thought the little photo etch piece had popped out then. And a little tiny bit here. There we go. So that's going to do for that bit. So a little bit of rust there. Next we're going to go in with the Starship Filth. So the first thing we want to do is put some Starship Filth on, again, on these louver parts. So I'm going to use the same brush. It doesn't matter if I get Starship Filth on this brush with rust on. I didn't want to get Starship Filth into the rust and discolour the rust, but I don't mind getting a bit of rust in the Starship Filth. So we're going to use the same brush. We don't need a big brush for this. Get paint off on the tissue. I love Starship Filth so much. If you've not got Starship Filth, get some. Just do it. Do it now. Go and do it now. Pause this video, go and buy some. emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs, and go and do it. So these aren't as black and dark as you think they are. They are dark and black, but not as black and dark as you think. So we're going to mix and match here a little bit. Again, try not to overlap the brown with the black too much, but I don't mind mixing and matching on this one because it kind of works. This one seems to be mostly around the edge. You can be quite careless with this. It's a very slapdash effect. When you see them on the real thing, you can see like the bits where they've airbrushed it, and it's not neat and it's not tidy, and it's very subtle. Probably go a bit heavy around the edge. Got to be careful. I don't want to damage these things. Get a bit more paint. Little bit more paint. And I'll tell you what you could do. Here's a little secret for you. You've noticed I haven't used any airbrushing yet for any of this stuff. I've all been doing dry brushing. Now it does mean you end up, if you looked at some of the streaks and things in those photographs a little while ago, you do end up with a little bit of texture to your paint. But keep in mind this is going to be a shelf queen, either in your display cabinet or in a glass case. Something you're not going to, people aren't going to get that close to look at it when it's on your cabinet. Put a bit down there. This one is quite dark. And dry brushing gives you a certain texture, a certain grain to the paint, which is fine. The reason I've not done any airbrushing, because you could do all this as airbrushing, you know, your little faded bits and your little streaks here and there, and some of the shading around where the rectenna dish is and that big impact on the right hand side mandible. You could airbrush that, but I feel I'm more comfortable doing it dry brushing because I think I get more control. And the other thing I like to do is if you're airbrushing, you tend to be using an acrylic paint. If you go a bit wrong with the airbrush, you're kind of knackered. There's not a lot you can do at that point. If you go too far with your airbrushing, you've kind of just, you know, you screwed the pooch. So if I do dry brushing, worst case scenario, if I go a bit wrong somewhere, I've got the option, because it's oil paint, I'm just getting some thinner and cleaning up my mess. Not perfectly, but cleaning up my mess a little bit. I've got the option of taking it back. With acrylic paints, you don't have that option. So whenever I've done a Falcon, I've never really done any airbrushing for things like the shading and weathering. Yeah, I've done the pre-shading stuff, but I've not done too much on there. For things like this, I've always done it with brushes, just because I have much more control over what I'm actually painting. So that's there. This one down here is actually quite clean, bizarrely. It's not actually that dark. There's a bit down here. And there's a bit here. Now you see, I'm not being careful. I'm just lightly dry brushing. I do have some you know, harsh edges here and there, but that's great, because if you look at the real thing, and I do apologise, I can't show. I think I said earlier on I'll put some pictures to show you. And then I forgot. A lot of the photographs you see of the studio model are actually copyright the person that took the photograph. A lot of them are like some guy took a load of photographs of the studio model at an exhibit. And that's most of the resource we've got that's out there. And it's copyright him, and it's not right for me to then take his pictures that he's got the copyright to and dump them into my video. So I can't show you the reference pictures. I had them on my iPad earlier on, and that's kind of a little bit of a get around, but that's just because I was showing you what pictures I had. I can't really show you much more than that, because they are copyright that person. So this one's quite dark, but it could be just the way the photograph's been taken. Okay, so that's the grill parts, and you can see it's not as dark. A lot of people just paint these black. Now, it might look dark to you, but in real life, trust me, you can still see all the grain. I've got all the little bits of the verticals and the horizontals standing out because they've been dry brushed over. Now what we have is the actual staining on the cowlings. So for this one, we have staining here. And this is why I love Starship Filth. It's a fantastic colour for this. It is just the right kind of, not cold, not warm. It's not blue and it's not brown. It's just a nice neutral, dark, slightly oily grey colour. A little bit there. Some more paint. Now I'm trying to show you this whole process, but I've got to think about things to talk about. So yes, I can't unfortunately show you the official, not the official, but I can't show you the resource pictures that I've got. This is here, so we need a bit of staining at the bottom. The staining tends to be at the bottom of these vents, where whatever comes out of them comes out. The carbon scoring happens at this kind of area. But again, it's very, very subtle. Again on this one. Now there are a lot of arguments as to why would this pattern of scoring be on the Falcon if it's, you know, even if it's flying through atmosphere, would they really stain in that direction? Just suspend your disbelief, people. Some people take these things way too seriously. Now, another little interesting thing about the Falcon model, the studio model, the 5-foot miniature. Whenever I'm talking about this, by the way, I'm referring to the 5-foot studio model, not the 32-inch one, because that's a whole different kettle of fish and has different greebles and everything. If you look at the actual film model, on the back of each of these cowlings, there's a little white reflective strip. And it's actually a product, I can't remember what it's called, but it's been used in movie and TV for years for models, for spaceships. It's a little bit of reflective film, and you cut it in little pieces and stick it on your spaceship. And when you shine a light on it, it reflects the light back, and it looks like you've installed lighting into the model, but you haven't. It's just reflecting the light back. And it's been used for years in TV and film production, where they can't afford to light a model, like on Blake 7 and things like that, and Doctor Who and you know, Buck Rogers and stuff, where they didn't want to put a load of expensive lighting into a model because it was maybe only going to be seen once. They put these little strips on. Now, it's been rumoured for a long time what they're doing on the Falcon, because they're on the back of all of these, and they're on the corners and backs of some of the hull parts. And it's speculated, because nobody's ever said, it's speculated that they're actually reference points for when they're doing all the matting and the chroma key and stuff, because they had to do it all manually. The theory was, or is, that they're actually reference points that show up on the film so they can make sure everything lines up. And I quite like that. Now, this is where it gets tricky. We've got them done quite nicely. That's where I want them. We've got to do the streaks. I'm going to have a bigger brush now. This is where we have to be very, very careful now, because it's very easy to overdo this. And it doesn't matter if I overdo it, it's just my own personal preference and pride. I'd rather make it minimal rather than maximal. Like when you saw the weathering on near the rectenna dish earlier, I think I went a bit too far on that, but it still looks okay. Now, what we have on each of these is a light patch with some dark areas. So for this one, it's mostly here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to orient it that way, and I'm just going to, I've taken most of the paint off this brush. I'm just going to dry brush that in there, like that. For this one, it's very faint. It's a very faint patch. It's not a strong patch at all. It goes to about there. For this one, it comes all the way down here, covers up this back of this. It might have been a Stug, or it could have been a Panzer IV. I can't remember which German tank this is, but it's the back part of a German tank hull. It's kind of here. I've got to be careful of this bit of plastic here. That needs gluing down, actually. I shall glue that down in a moment. It's kind of here, and it's kind of here. It comes from the. I need some more paint. It comes from the exhaust, and it seems to go this way. I hope this is all on camera and coming out. Probably not all up here somewhere. It seems to come this way from the exhaust and down this side quite a bit. But you want like a faint area like that, and then I want to build it up in the middle because it's like darker with a halo around the edge. Now on this side, it doesn't really flow from here, but it is there. We'll be careful because of that. But it does seem to come from this little vent here. So there's that little bit there. And then that's going to come up here. And that's about it. That's about as much as it does on that. It's really not... Oh, I need a bit more on here maybe. Just a touch of it to make this less bright. It's not that dark on here at all. Like this one here is literally that little triangle there of dark grey, and that's it. That comes down to about here. Have I got a different picture that shows all the way out? Yeah, it comes down to about here. So it stains, this one stains kind of to about here. I hope is this on camera? I hope so. Stains to about here. And then kind of just stops. But it's darker in the middle there. Now I could have done I've seen people do this with black. That's why you don't want black, because you want the faint areas and the bright areas. You really don't want solid blackness. Now the camera might cut out at any time if I run out of time, so if I suddenly stop, apologies, just means my camera ran out of memory. This one is just a very faint patch between the two. So it's quite literally just, I'm just dry brushing this over to get this kind of strip. Little circular motions help you keep a nice smooth gradient between the two. I'm going to be careful of all the greebles. But that is about as much as I want to do there. It's literally about that much. Now I know I'm just looking at this on camera and it looks really dark, but trust me, when you see this in real life, that's a stain. It's not a dark patch at all. It's not dark at all. This one is mostly light staining. So we're just going to scrub this around just to tone this down. Now, I will freely admit, I'm criticising people for doing big black streaks. I will freely admit I've been guilty of that in the past as well. This is the first time I've done one of these that I've actually had proper reference material for the 5-foot Falcon. And it's the first time I've actually understood the differences between the 5-foot and the 32-inch. This one here, we'll get some more paint. So I'm taking quite a lot of pride in this one now. I've always tried to do my best, of course, and you know, I hope I've done good work for the people I've made them for, but I've always been using the 32-incher. And if you look at the 32-incher, it does have a more, because it's smaller, they've done a more exaggerated paint job on it. So that's literally about there, and there's a little bit there. And we've got this bit here, which is, again, very subtle here. Goes from the cowling to here, but then we have a nice dark streak here. It really comes from that little exhaust bit there, and I can't quite see that one. I don't think I've got reference picture for that side, have I? Just scrolling through now. No, some of it I'm having to wing it because I don't have a reference shot, so that one I'll just assume is very similar. And that's kind of it. That is about as much as I need to do for the black streaks. For the, well, they're not really black streaks, but for the dark streaks on the things at the back. That's about it. That's about as complicated as it needs to get. Now, what I need to do now I've done that, I need to go away. I've got to do this kind of shading on, you know where the gunwale is here. I won't show it because we're running out of time now, but we've got the gunwale here. Between the gunwale and the hull, I need to go around the base of that and do a very subtle shade around the edge of that. That's on the top and the bottom. And there's a couple of parts where you've got the little maintenance pits on the mandibles. I just need to do a very light, that kind of shade, just around some of them, where there's a little bit of a dark shade, just where they've airbrushed a little bit of dark paint on there, just to suggest some scoring or burning. The actual maintenance pits themselves, when you saw those shots earlier, they're not dark. They're not. Most of them don't have much going on apart from a little bit of the dark grey and a touch of rust. So don't assume all the recessed areas are dark like you see on the box art. So I'll go and get all those bits done, and then we've just got one last thing to do now, I think, which is to add a little tiny bit of light colour paint chipping. So I'll go and get those bits done, and when we come back, we'll do that, and then I think we're done. Back in a moment. Alrighty, with that done, we have one final step. Oh, so close now. One final step, and that is to do a tiny bit of chipping that's needed in a couple of places. And for this, we're going back to acrylic paints. We're going to, well, I say acrylic, it's Tamiya paints. Our original mix of white and deck tan, the one we used to spray the ship in the first place. Going to go back to this. I'm going to get myself a very fine little brush. I've put in a little metal tin, and I've added the tiniest amount of thinner to it, just to make it flow a bit better. And all we're going to do is we're going to add a few small chips in a few places. I've got the reference pictures in front of me. These are by no means anywhere near massively accurate, but what basically these represent, if they're even visible, probably not, these represent where the model makers that did the Falcon actually used, say, a Dremel tool to drill through the paint on the model. And what they did was they exposed, first of all, the paint underneath that was clean because it was under where the weathering. Like if they weather the paint, then they scrape the top layer off. You get the white paint underneath, or the off-white paint. And then in some places it went down through to the black primer because they primed it in black to start with. So we're getting this wonderful sort of white speckly bits and little black speckly bits. Now I'm just going to reproduce the little white speckly bits here, just to get them done. And we have, where does this go? This goes here. It's quite a big bit here. So it's not really exactly accurate here, but we're going to get it close to. So I'm just dotting this on. There's a big blob here. So it's basically where they've dremeled through all the weathering and they've exposed the clean layer of paint underneath. And it's only in a few little places. I say most places they go through to the primer, and that's where you get all the little sort of impacts on the front of the model, where that big gouge is near the mandible, that kind of thing. But in a few places they just go through the weathering and expose the clean paint underneath. So that's what we're doing here. Now there's only a couple of small places where this is needed here, and there's a couple of other bits. Where's the other one? Let me find the other one. The other one is here. We need a little bit round here, again where they've just gone round and exposed some of the white plastic. Now I notice here there was supposed to be a splub of the oil paint here, a dark patch. That seems to have rubbed off, so I'll have to go back and add that back on again. It would be the work of a butter moment. But yeah, this is just to create a little bit of chipping. So there's a couple of tiny places where this needs to be done. Once I've done this, I just need to take the masking tape off the canopy, and we are done. So let me get that done, and when you come back, hopefully, all being well, I'll have figured out how to get this on the spinny thing and in such a way that you can actually see the finished thing. So, back in a moment. And with the spinny thing in full force as the beautiful ship hoves into view, it can mean only one thing: build complete. Yes, we are done. Project complete. It only taken me 2.5 years. Yeah, I'm not the most timely builder. Wow, what an amazing project this has been. What an amazing model this is. Absolute great fun to build. Not hard at all. Not hard whatsoever. Dead simple. A joy to put together. But then again, it's a Bandai kit, so of course it's a joy to put together. And absolute great fun to paint, and I hope I've shown throughout this process, you may think of it as like a big scary kit, but I hope I've shown that it's not that hard to build. It's just putting a piece inside another piece and then a piece on top of that. It's not that hard to build, but also not that hard to paint. And like I said right at the start of this project, the Millennium Falcon is probably one of the easiest paint jobs you'll ever do, because it's so straightforward. It's a base colour and some simple weathering, and yeah, it looks fantastic. So don't be put off by the price or the scale or the whatever. It's all nice, easy weathering and painting. Now, of course, I did make this video for my very good friends at emodels.co.uk, and it would be remiss of me, of course, not to remind you that if you want to get this kit for yourself, they do have it in stock now. Now, don't forget, like I've said before, Bandai no longer make this kit. They do make the standard edition that comes with stickers. They no longer make this edition that comes with water slide decals or the lighting kit. So if you've been looking to treat yourself and you want to pick one up, eModels have pretty much the remaining UK stock in store now available. It's no longer in print. They haven't made this kit for about 1.5 to 2 years. Eventually, once they've all been sold, people will start putting them on eBay for like £1,000. So if you want to avoid that and you really want to get one of these kits, go and check it out. There's a link in the description below this video. Go and check it out. Go and get yourself one and have yourself a good time. It is the most accurate representation of the 5-foot studio miniature you'll ever get. It's just the most accurate Falcon. End of. Anyway, that's going to do me, so thank you very, very much for watching this entire series. I will be back with an eModels build soon. I've got a plan for what I want to do next. And until next time, I'll say, take care of yourselves. Go to emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs. And I'll see you soon. Adios, amoebas.